Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are cutting straight through all the noise and confusion to look at the absolute optimal window for conception. And you know what? We're going to rely entirely on the hard science to do it. Let's get right into it. So here's a crazy question for you. Is waiting for ovulation day actually ruining your chances of pregnancy? I know. When I first read this in the source material, it sounded completely backwards to me too. I mean, for decades, the conventional wisdom passed down to us has been all about pinpointing that exact day of ovulation, right? We're told to time absolutely everything around that specific 24-hour window. But as we're going to see, the data reveals a massive biological plot twist that literally changes everything we thought we knew. Okay, let's dive into this. The core of all this confusion really comes down to what we can call the ovulation day myth. And hey, the assumption seems totally logical, right? If the egg is released on ovulation day, well, that must be the absolute best time to try. So what do? We go out, we buy those expensive little kits, and we wait for a smiley face on a test strip. But it turns out human biology is way more fascinating and a little more complicated than just a simple calendar matching game. And to understand why, we don't actually have to guess. We can look at a staggering 225,000 menstrual cycles. That's the actual amount of data analyzed in a landmark 2019 study published in the journal Fertility and Sterility. We're not talking about some tiny trial here. This is a massive, real-world sweep of data showing us exactly when conception actually happens in real life. And if that wasn't convincing enough for you, another huge analysis looked at over 600,000 cycles using fertility app data. So when you put it all together, we're looking at nearly 1 million data points across these studies. And from that mountain of information, a scientifically validated map emerges. Spoiler alert, it completely contradicts the whole wait for the day strategy. So what does the data from those hundreds of thousands of cycles actually show us? It shows us the true fertility window. It turns out conception almost exclusively occurs when intimacy happens in a very specific time frame, stretching from 7 days before ovulation to just 1 day after ovulation. I want you to really think about that for a second. The window literally opens a full week before the egg even makes an appearance. In fact, for some women who have shorter cycles, this means their fertility window can pop open immediately after their period ends. Crazy, right? But why? Why does all this data skew so heavily to the days leading up to the main event? And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why. See, human sperm has an absolutely incredible capacity for survival. It can hang out and live inside the female reproductive tract for up to 7 days, basically just waiting around. The egg, on the other hand, is incredibly fragile. Once it's released, its viability, its ability to actually get fertilized, is super short. We're talking a maximum of just 24 hours. So the mechanical reality of our biology means that the sperm needs to be there already waiting at the finish line before the egg even arrives. Think of it like a race. If you wait for the egg to drop before you even start running, you're already too late. Now, before we get into the exact daily breakdown of your chances, I think it's kind of helpful to ground ourselves in some realistic expectations. Timing is definitely crucial, for sure, but it's not the only factor at play here. Age heavily influences our baseline probability, and understanding this baseline is super important because it helps us appreciate just how vital it is to optimize the things we actually can control, like our timing. For instance, let's take a healthy woman at age 30 engaging in regular intimacy without contraception. Her average chance of getting pregnant in any single cycle is only about 20%, and by age 40, that baseline average drops down to about 5%. Now, obviously, fertility varies wildly from person to person. You could totally have a 40-year-old with higher natural fertility than a 25-year-old, but these averages serve as a good reminder that human reproduction is fundamentally a giant game of probabilities. You want to give yourself the absolute best possible statistical advantage, right? So let's look at exactly how nailing the daily timing shifts those odds in your favor. We are now going to track the daily probability of conception leading right up to ovulation day. Consider this our biological countdown. I want you to imagine the 7 days leading up to the release of the egg, and I just want you to watch how dramatically your chances increase, day by day, as we get closer and closer to the main event. Let's start the countdown. If intimacy occurs exactly 7 days before ovulation, the chance of conception is sitting at about 3%. Because sperm can live for a week, it's possible, but, not highly likely. But watch this snowball effect. At 5 days before ovulation, your chances literally triple to 9%. Then, at 3 days before ovulation, they jump incredibly to 27%. Notice how that probability is just surging upward? This clearly shows the immense benefit of early intimacy, the whole idea of having the sperm ready and waiting. And here is where the data really shocked me. 2 days before ovulation, your chances hit 33%. And then just 1 day before ovulation, the probability peaks at a massive 42%. Let that sink in. The absolute golden window is not on the day of ovulation. The absolute peak of your chances occurs the day before. But now, we've got to look at what happens next. Think about it. If the peak is the day before, what happens on the day literally millions of people are actively waiting for? What happens on actual ovulation day? Well, brace yourselves because this completely contradicts the most popular conception advice out there. 20%. You heard that right. That is a massive drop. The exact day the egg is released, your chances just fall right off a cliff. They plummet from that 42% peak all the way down to 20%. That means if you're intentionally holding off, just waiting for that little ovulation test to smile at you to confirm it's quote-unquote a day, you have literally cut your chances of getting pregnant by more than half. Because remember, the egg is only viable for 24 hours. By the time it's actually released, the clock is ticking so unbelievably fast that you are already at a massive disadvantage. And guys, it actually gets worse. Just 1 day after ovulation, your chances collapse to a mere 8%. I mean, think about the practical reality of using those ovulation test strips, right? You get a positive test in the morning, and maybe you wait until that evening or even the next day to take action. Well, by the time the sperm actually makes the journey, you are highly likely already sitting in this 8% territory. By trying to be perfectly precise, you've pretty much completely missed the window. Which brings us to a really important quote from the source material that just summarizes this whole problem perfectly. Dr. Kamal notes, waiting for ovulation to select gender is unscientific and actively reduces your chances of pregnancy. See, there's this widespread, totally unscientific myth floating around that having intimacy exactly on the day of ovulation produces a boy, and doing it before ovulation produces a girl. Well, not only is that biologically false, but women who delay intimacy, waiting for ovulation day just to try and select a gender, are severely punishing their overall chances of getting pregnant at all. You are literally trading a 42% chance for a 20% or even an 8% chance, all based on a total myth. No way is that a good trade. So the crucial point here is that we need to completely rethink our strategy. We need to stop acting like snipers, trying to hit some tiny moving target on a single day, and instead, we need to start thinking about consistency. How do we actually take all this data, the 7-day sperm lifespan, the super short 24-hour egg lifespan, that massive 42% peak the day before, and turn it into a practical, optimal routine? Well, what does an optimal routine actually look like when we base it on the science? Let's map it out. If day 1 is the start of your cycle, you'll want to fast forward to day 8, which is generally the end of menstruation. This right here is when routine intimacy should begin. Now, you might be wondering, why so early? Well, because that fertility window opens up to 7 days before ovulation. And let's face it, cycle lengths can vary. So you maintain this regular routine straight through the typical ovulation window, which often begins around day 14, and you keep it up until at least day 20. The whole goal is regular, consistent intimacy every 2 to 3 days throughout this entire block of time. By doing this, you practically guarantee that whenever that egg drops, there's already viable sperm waiting right there at the finish line. You capture that 42% peak without ever needing to pee on a stick to try and time it perfectly. Wow, we have covered a lot of ground today, dismantling decades-old myths with nearly 1 million points of hard data. It really is an incredible biological twist, isn't it? The realization that trying too hard to be perfect with your timing might be the exact thing causing you to miss your window. So I want to leave you with this final thought to consider. Knowing this massive biological twist, how will you change your approach to tracking your health? Will you ditch the stress of that single-day target and embrace the science of the wider window? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, keep looking at the data, and I'll see you next time.